Well, hello there, ladies and gents. Great to see you again. Welcome back to Closing Arguments. Ryan Ruff here, your moderator, joined alongside Jack Razumich as always. Look, we seem to really struggle to get off the topic of self-defense. We're back diving into another topic and conversation surrounding self-defense. This time, we our last conversation, we talked through two specific cases in the state of Indiana where self-defense came into play from, let's just say, one citizen or person to another. Today, we're taking a little bit of a different angle at this, and we're looking at the relationship between self-defense and police. We're going to be talking through whether or not police have the same self-defense rights as the rest of us. And then also we're going to be shedding light on how this plays into the situation that we've been seeing unfolding in Minneapolis, which has caught the attention of the nation at large. So we're going to kind of see that and those opportunities, or rather not opportunities, but circumstances, through Jack's eyes, and of course talk through where self-defense comes into play, how it comes into play, and maybe debunk some of the myths along the way. So with that being said, let's go ahead and bring him out. Jack, good to see you today. How you doing?
It's been a long year, and we're only at day 16 of it. So awesome, all things being equal.
Sure. No, you can say that again. I know we've been trading some messages offline, and I know you guys and the team at Razumich Associates have had your hands full, to say the least. But obviously, excited to be here with you today, jumping back into self-defense with you. Jack, before we get into Minneapolis and Minnesota and everything that's transpiring over there, let's talk through the backside of that, and that is the relationship between self-defense and police. I'll start with just kind of an opening question. Do police have the same self-defense rights as the rest of us?
The short answer is mostly yes. The reality of the situation that neither side wants to really acknowledge anytime there's a police action shooting situation that's involved is that the police don't magically become different beings by putting on a badge or putting on body armor. They are still citizens of the United States. They are still citizens of the state that they are residents of, or that has jurisdiction over them. And the law does apply, at least in the aggregate term, to them equally. So, time of recording, we just dropped our more in-depth self-defense video on Monday. So this is a topic that we literally just went over. But to hit the high points of that again, under Indiana law authorizes a person to use a reasonable amount of force, up to and including deadly force, to repeal what the person believes is the imminent use of unlawful force against themselves or a third party. That also applies to police officers. They do have the same right of self-defense. There is also the concept of what reasonable looks like to an officer versus reasonable to somebody else. And that's where there's a little bit of a difference on that. And I also think that's where we've fallen down a lot of times over the years. Special privileges come with special responsibilities, and I think that's what tends to cause problems whenever a police involved shooting takes place. Is I don't think that we're necessarily giving our officers the appropriate conflict resolution skills that might need to be out there. And that's not to say that the job is easy. The job is very difficult. And the same issue of looking at it from the perspective of the person claiming self-defense does apply for the officers as well. Years ago, when I was starting my legal career out, there was a judge who had a sign hanging in his courtroom that said a police officer has to make a decision in seconds that lawyers will spend years arguing about. That's true. It's also true for the non-police officers. Anyone who's claiming self-defense is making that decision in seconds that the lawyers are going to be spending years arguing about. And the law does still require that the defendant or the person who's claiming self-defense, that their actions be looked at objectively from the person's subjective view about what danger did or did not exist. Being a police officer does not magically remove that from the law. They still get to claim, I had this perception of danger and I acted on it based off of my reasonable fear. Where it becomes an issue is we do, most of us at least certainly hope better from people who are trained professionals or are supposed to be trained professionals. And that's why these police shootings do tend to get in a lot of press, both in the state, in the nation, in the world sometimes. Because it does feel sometimes like we do hold police to a different standard that's lower than the standard the rest of us have to deal with. And that's not correct. They are held to the same standard. I would also be remiss if I weren't factually accurate that police shootings are fortunately extremely rare. Something in the area of about 1 or 2% of all interactions with law enforcement in this country do involve a shooting. The problem is, when those shootings happen, there are an awful lot of questions about could that shooting have been avoided, and why wasn't it avoided?
Right. I mean, naturally, they can attract attention in a lot of different ways, shapes, and forms, depending on, of course, on the extenuating circumstances. But let's look at the backside of what happens here, Jack. Walk us through how police shootings are investigated, and then kind of a secondary thought is, what are some of the difficulties along the way for prosecuting a police-involved shooting?
How they're investigated is actually a spectacularly good question. One of the things that upsets a lot of people anytime there's a police-involved shooting is a lot of times the investigation is handled by a special subdivision of that department. For anyone who watches the various police procedural shows that have been populating television almost since the very beginning, you've probably heard the term internal affairs. That is a department within the police force that does handle investigations of any type of officer involvement, especially firearms related offenses. A lot of times the police department or the county prosecutor will ask an outside police agency to conduct the investigation. That at least creates a veneer of impartiality on that, because it does seem like we're not investigating ourselves and found like we did nothing wrong. There's at least a third party you can look at with that. The problem sometimes with that is the degree of impartiality, I think, is questionable. It's not uncommon for law enforcement officers to switch between departments. I don't want to say that they're jumping from department to department. That has negative connotations. But it's not uncommon for police officers to, just because of opportunity or moving, to change police departments. We were in a time of recording. We were in a suppression hearing yesterday with a Indiana State Trooper who, prior to becoming an Indiana State Trooper, was a member of the French Lick, Indiana Police Department, and then before that was working as what's referred to as a merit deputy with the Owen County Sheriff's Department. So that's 3 different police departments that he's worked for. If in his responsibility as an Indiana State Trooper, he were somehow called on to investigate either the Owen County Sheriff's Department or the French Lick Police Department, you again now start having questions about, like, well, is this really an impartial investigation? Because you're still investigating somewhere that you used to work. You're investigating people that you might still know,
right, or have a relationship with.
Yeah, so that's kind of one of the issues with how these investigations are carried out. But officially, they are carried out by either the police agency itself internally, or because the county prosecutor will ask an outside third-party police agency to conduct the investigation. Once the investigation is done, just like any other investigation, at least in Indiana, and again, same caveat they always do, a lot of these issues are based off of our understanding of Indiana law because we are licensed in Indiana, not anywhere else. Like any other investigation that is conducted by a law enforcement agency, the results of that investigation are taken to the county prosecutor, who will make a decision as to whether or not to charge the officer by what's referred to as an information. That's the fill-in-the-blank form that most prosecutors use when filing charges against people in the state of Indiana. The prosecutor can determine to put it in front of a grand jury, which is a whole nother can of worms that would probably, given some of the stuff we're seeing with grand juries, really needs its own episode. But just really quickly, grand juries are one-sided affairs. It is the prosecutor presenting what they believe to be the relevant facts to a special jury that is impaneled. There are no defense attorneys there. There is no cross-examination. It's basically just a narrative, kind of like I'm telling you a story right now that would be the prosecutor telling it to the grand jury. And at the end of the day, asking the grand jury, we would like you to consider returning what's referred to as an indictment on these specific criminal charges that we're considering. And if the grand jury says no, that's the end of it. If the grand jury says yes, you have what's referred to as a true bill and a prosecution proceeds forward. The third option, of course, is the prosecutor can look at it, determine that there's not enough of a basis to file a criminal complaint or refer to a grand jury, and they'll hold a press conference explaining why they didn't file any charges of any type. The reason that you don't see a lot of police officers or other law enforcement personnel actually charged with criminal offenses is twofold. First and foremost, by and large, the public, even if the public is unhappy with the performance that a law enforcement officer may or may not have engaged in, by and large, the public typically does have a high opinion of police officers and law enforcement in general. I mean, we're taught from a very young age that you seek out officer friendly if something is wrong. The entire media landscape, dating back to the radio, is always about good, just, upright police officers who are doing the right thing. God, I can still quote various episodes of Dragnet from you line by line because I saw them so many times. We have a very high opinion of the police. And psychologically, we as individuals want to think that we will never be in that position. We have, and I'm not a trained psychologist. I'm just going off of things that I've seen in my career. We all have kind of this confirmation bias where we think that we would do something different, or we would not be in a position that a defendant or a suspect finds themselves in. We want to think that we will do better, and because we would do better, we would not have come in contact with law enforcement. So again, I think we've talked about this term before, the concept of those people versus us. You know, we're good people, those people are bad guys, and if they weren't doing something wrong, they wouldn't have been involved with law enforcement. And that's a very, very, very dangerous way of thinking, given some of the stuff that we're seeing in the country right now. And that's why prosecuting police officers tend to be a little bit of problem.
Yeah.
I guess one third thing, because this will come up with our second half of our discussion too, is the concept of certain immunities that the police have.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. I mean, you mentioned that while yes, they're acting as a police officer, they still hold the same rights as a private citizen. But does the badge come with any perks, if you will?
A little bit of yes and a little bit of no.
Okay.
Law enforcement, like most government agencies, enjoys a degree of what is referred to as qualified immunity. Qualified immunity, if you ever wanted to talk about activist courts and judges making law from the bench, qualified immunity right there is the number one example. Like this doctrine does not exist in the law. It is a doctrine that was created by the court system to shield police officers from civil liability for actions taken under color of law. So, for example, if a police officer is chasing a suspect and runs through your flower bed and tramples your petunias, but these were like special show petunias, and I realize that this analogy is getting a little bit out of hand, but let's just run with it right now.
Keep it going.
You're not going to be able to sue the police department for the loss of your petunias because he has qualified immunity from that. He was acting under color of law, executing his official duties in his official capacity, and you can't sue him. Mm-hmm. that immunity has.
Wait, Jack, real quick, kind of like an example I feel like we see a lot in movies and television, like a police chase is happening. He needs, a cop needs your vehicle. They grab your vehicle to pursue the the individual they're chasing. Is that kind of a similar example? Like they needed to commit that act in order to continue to do their job and make the community safe by chasing after this criminal?
That's a good question because I don't think that I have ever come across a situation in real life.
Again, this is
carjacking somebody.
That's such an example that we see in movies and television.
Right.
Why not? I just figured.
I don't think so because, and the reason I would say that is qualified immunity does have its limitations.
Of course, it's got to.
If the officer is acting in a way that is completely contrary to anything that they would be authorized to do by law, qualified immunity isn't going to apply. If the police action is excessively over the top, so for example, the joke, and sadly it's not really a joke if you start digging behind it. There's the argument, there's the meme or the cartoon about an officer beating a suspect on the ground, screaming stop resisting, when clearly they're not moving or causing any issue. That's gonna be okay to a point because the officer has to secure the suspect. The officer is clearly gotten to the point where force is necessary to effect the arrest. So they're going to get some qualified immunity on that. Where it becomes an issue is if that becomes excessive. Like if an officer runs up and kicks somebody in the head full force, a punt kick, that's probably going to be excessive force. That's not going to be covered by qualified immunity because now significantly more force than necessary has been used to effect that arrest. The traditional concept of qualified immunity, again, applies very heavily to the idea of civil liability and can you sue the officer for their actions. And to an extent, I do agree with qualified immunity to an extent. I obviously do not work for the prosecutor's office, but I am very well aware from my friends that are in the prosecutor's office how many lawsuits they have to fend off. And they're typically ridiculous lawsuits. Most people are not having their rights. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen where people don't have their rights violated, but the volume of cases from people who are writing in themselves that need to be answered by the disciplinary commission or need to have a response turned over to the companies that insure the county offices, it's excessive and it's a lot. And it probably would bankrupt most law enforcement agencies. So I agree with it to the extent that there should be some shield for actions taken in an official capacity. Where I think that this has become a problem is we've largely extended the deference that qualified immunity provides not only to civil cases, but also to criminal cases. And there is a sense of no accountability that's going on.
Yeah.
Whether you agree with there being no accountability or not, the optic is certainly that it's not getting better. And actions that law enforcement are taking increasingly seem to be under a heavier microscope. And the concept of I would not be held to the same standard is really getting kind of by the wayside on that. And that's bad. That's an erosion of trust that causes problems for everyone. Yeah, I get the frustration.
And qualified immunity kind of becoming like a gray area, and totally up for interpretation. It opens the door for muddy waters. Well, let's take this now and transition it into the events that we've been seeing play out in Minneapolis here recently. Obviously, it's sparked a ton of controversy. I mean, if you pull up just about any social media site, any newspaper, online publication, it's going to be right there in front of you. We saw national headlines being made. An ICE agent that fatally shot a 37-year-old woman, Renée Nicole Good. Let's talk through what we know versus what's speculation. Let's hear it from you, Jack.
Sure. So first of all, if somehow you have managed to not hear about this case in the past week, welcome to the internet. There are cat videos. That's about as good as it gets. It's all downhill from there. Joke aside, what's happening in Minnesota is not good by any stretch of the imagination. What we know is that on January 7th of this year, a woman in Minneapolis by the name of Renee Good found herself coming into contact with assorted agents that were deputized by the Immigration Customs Enforcement Bureau of the Department of Homeland Security. Immigration and Customs Enforcement they're known typically by the acronym of ICE. ICE is a relatively new federal position in the wake of the reorganization of law enforcement following the September 11 terror attacks, when most of the intelligence agencies and law enforcement agencies were reorganized into the Department of Homeland Security. Border Patrol had their responsibilities changed. Under normal circumstances, I would have been able to tell you exactly what the precursor to ICE was, what the name of that agency was. I do not remember off the top of my head. I'm sure someone will pop into the comments and tell me what it was. So thank you from past me to future commentators. But their responsibility was changed, and Border Patrol basically became ICE, or they got merged in with ICE. But ICE is a relatively new agency. It's only been around for about 25 years at this point in time. Their function as law enforcement represents a remarkably gray area. Border Patrol agents are sometimes written into law enforcement or peace officers in state statutes. Sometimes they are not. They are covered differently under federal law. We'll get into that in a moment when we get to that concept. But I wanted to give that kind of as an illustration of a background situation. The reason that Miss Good came into contact with ICE officers is the current administration, the second Trump administration, has significantly increased their focus on immigration policing, by which I mean they're focusing on removing people who are not in the country legally. The initial focus was on removing people who had criminal convictions. That is still at least the stated purpose. They seem to be expanding by anyone who simply has overstayed a visa or has committed no crime other than being in the country illegally, which I do acknowledge that is a crime. There are degrees. Again, this goes back to the concept of the reasonable use of force situation. You probably want to focus more on the guy who is out there committing acts of theft over the guy who's, just basically jaywalking. Those are both crimes. They both deserve a response. One is probably a little bit higher of a priority. But because the administration has such a huge focus on that right now, we also have, kind of tangentially related to this, there is an ongoing fraud investigation regarding immigrants who were in the Minnesota area that may or may not have defrauded the state government of millions of dollars during the COVID pandemic. That shine a bright, shiny spotlight on Minneapolis and Minnesota in general. So the government sends in a sizable number of ICE deputies, ICE agents. They come into contact with Renee Good. At one point in time, an ICE agent by the name of Jonathan Ross is walking around the Nicole Good's vehicle. He has his cell phone in his hand. He's videotaping the interaction. Nicole Good's wife is also videotaping the interaction on a cell phone. Words are exchanged. It appears that Miss Good is flippant is probably certainly the way the state would describe it, but that's at least kind of inaccurate, like a little bit sarcastic, a little bit jeering. The ICE officers are a little bit more belligerent. If you've ever seen any of you, everyone at this point in time has to have seen or at least know what South Park is. There's a very early episode where Cartman becomes a deputy police officer or a school police officer or something like that. I don't remember the entire thing. But he affects the stereotypical Southern accent and says, the first thing we need to do is respect my authority. The ICE agents are very much kind of putting that type of, aggressive, you will respect me. And I'm putting this in the what we know as opposed to what we speculate, is because everyone has seen these damn videos at this point in time. Everyone can hear tone of voice. Everyone can hear and see what's going on. So at one point in time, Renee Good goes to leave. This is a little bit more appropriate for the next part, but just so you can describe the situation, what's going on. There are some conflicting reports regarding whether or not she was ordered to get out of her vehicle or whether or not she was being told to get out of there. Again, on the assorted videos that have been circulated online, it does seem like officers are shouting both things at her. We know that at one point in time, one officer, as she was trying to pull away, was attempting to open the driver's side door, probably to get her out of the vehicle. We know that Jonathan Good positioned himself at some distance in front of Renee Good's SUV. We know from videos that he switched his cell phone from his right hand to his left hand while continuing to film the interaction. And at some point in time, he drew his service revolver. So his service revolver at some point in time is in his right hand. Renee Good starts driving forward, and I'm going to use driving here as opposed to accelerating because I think that's a little bit more appropriate for the speculation concept, but she starts driving forward. Agent Ross is still in front of the vehicle at some point in time, moves to the side, jumps to the side, fires one shot initially while the vehicle is in front of him, and then appears to fire two more shots into the open driver's side window as the car completes its turn. It's doing a 2-point turn. It reverses and then moves its wheels and moves forward. And at some point in time, at least one of those shots hits Renee Good, and she ends up dying as a result of gunshot wounds. At this moment in time, at the time of recording, to the best of my knowledge, no autopsy records have been released. There has been no firm discussion as to how many shots hit her, if multiple shots hit her, if there was one specific one that killed her, things of that nature. But that's what we know kind of as the objective situation. With regards to what everyone is speculating about right now, that's effectively everything else. One person who had a breakdown of the situation that I saw online had a comment about this, and I think it's very accurate. This is effectively a Rorschach test, which means that you're going to see out of this what you want to. The people who believe that this was a justifiable shooting because Renee Good was accelerating towards the officer and weaponizing her vehicle as a deadly weapon and tried to kill him, that's what they're going to see. No one is going to convince them otherwise. And by the same token, anyone who looks at this as being ICE overreacting and creating the dangerous situation, and that there's no reasonable fear for physical safety in this situation, that this is not a justified shooting. It is at best voluntary manslaughter, at worst actual murder. You're not going to convince them otherwise either. I mean, everyone's kind of digging their feet into this, and things that have popped up on this do focus very heavily on situations like, where were her eyes? Where were the wheels pointing? What could the officer see in real time? Because this is a nationwide example in how self-defense works. we're all sitting here as a jury of 350 million people, or at least however many of those people are old enough to actually watch YouTube videos. And we have the benefit of looking back at this at extremely slow motion. Looking at the situation with the benefit of hindsight, with the benefit of not physically being there. The actual, like all the videos showing the interaction between Renee Young starting to leave. Sorry, not Renee Young. Renee Young is a wrestling commentator. Renee Good.
Renee Good, yes.
Renee Good starting to leave, the shots being fired, and Miss Good's car crashing into, I believe it was a utility poles where the car finally ended up resting. Real time, this is like 5 seconds, 6 seconds. Yeah. That's how fast these things happen.
Yeah.
And it has to be subjectively, the jury has to reach an objective determination that the defendant's subjective claim of self-defense was appropriate. And all the totality of the circumstances, that creates a problem. And that's why there's so much speculation on that.
Mm-hmm. Well, Jack, I mean, this goes back to our last episode where we talk about, and you mentioned it at the top of today's episode, and that's, you have 5 seconds to make a decision and a lifetime of lawyers talking about it. And you mentioned the kind of, you started alluding to the prosecution of it and what a jury would need to take a look at. So let's move into, like, what can the state of Minnesota actually do based on what we're seeing play out? Because right now, the events that come from what transpired are being heavily scrutinized by both, call them parties, the types of viewers that are making the interpretations that you laid out before us, whether or not it was, intentional and malicious or it was reactionary. And what can Minnesota actually do right now? Because their actions are important with the nation watching.
This goes back to the concept of, again, there are a lot of things that are kind of overlapping in this. First and foremost, you do have the concept that Agent Ross is a federal employee. And the Constitution has what's referred to as a supremacy clause in it. It basically, in a nutshell, it kind of effectively means that anyone who's executing federal law is superior. It is supreme over state law. And there was a case, for the benefit of those listening, this is a little bit more freeform than normal. Given the need to get this out quickly, we did not do a lot of the same research that we usually do when we take more time between episodes. So I don't have the name of this case off the top of my head, but there was a case, a Supreme Court case, I want to say close to 50 years ago or something like that, that basically discussed that under normal circumstances, a federal officer or a federal employee who is executing federal law pursuant to the dictates of federal guidelines could not be held criminally liable in state court for violating a concurrent state law. We have 51 different jurisdictions in the United States. We have 50 individual state jurisdictions. We have one overriding federal jurisdiction, and those laws sometimes will overlap with each other. A good example that I like to use is murder in general. So there is no general federal murder statute. If you murder a federal employee, you can be charged in federal court, but that is a very specific, you have murdered a federal employee situation, that the status allows them to charge you federally. Whereas murder as a general offense is a state offense. And one of the reasons that came up is actually when President John Kennedy was assassinated in 1963 in Texas. It was not a federal offense to assassinate the President of the United States. It was just murder, which had to be dealt with in the Texas state court. So that created a lot of back and forth and controversy, and of course they fixed that. But you'll see those overlaps with that situation. That said, and this goes back to, again, what we discussed with regards to the qualified immunity situation, the ability to claim supremacy is not absolute. If the court finds that, after argument from all the attorneys and all the briefings and everything along those lines, finds that the Agent Ross, was acting outside of the color of law, in which the concept is his actions were not reasonably connected to the execution of his federal responsibilities, the supremacy argument would fail and a prosecution could happen. Where Minnesota is having troubles right now is the Trump administration has declared that the investigation will be handled 100% by the FBI, and Minnesota is not allowed to participate. They are not allowed to observe. They are not allowed to have access to anything. This is completely within the powers of the federal government, and deal with it. From an optics standpoint, that is, to be perfectly blunt, complete and utter bullshit. We talked before when we were discussing the difficulty or how these cases get investigated. Part of the problem you see with police shootings is this appearance that they're just doing a cover-up. And on every optical level, this looks like a cover-up. You know, if you are freezing out an entire state investigation agency because you don't like what they might find, and I am perhaps being unfair. That is my own bias showing through on this. It doesn't scream that you're going to do a fair and impartial investigation on this. And from Minnesota's perspective, they could build thanks to all the videos that are out there, both the videos that were magically leaked to the press. That's what Agent Ross's video was. The fact that it was given to a so-called right-wing or right-leaning media agency as opposed to a natural leak, which would probably have just shown up on YouTube like this, tells me they think that video helps exonerate him. Between things like that, obviously Renee Good's wife has a video of what happened. Dozens of other people have videos that are going on about this. The state of Minnesota could theoretically use that to build a case internally based off of, it seems good enough to us. Now again, I am not licensed in Minnesota. I only have a very general understanding of their laws. So I don't know if their probable cause standard is higher than the one in Indiana, if it's the same level, if they would need to put this in front of a grand jury, or how they would have to do it. But I will tell you that I have had clients that are not police officers charged here in Indiana on far less than what we're seeing coming out of Minnesota. So if Minnesota decided that they wanted to make a criminal complaint, the next thing would be to determine what charges would or would not be appropriate. And this is where language becomes a big issue with it. I had mentioned earlier, ICE is a completely separate law enforcement. It's not completely separate. It's a newer law enforcement style agency. It's only been around for about 24-ish years. They may not be covered by Minnesota's definition of what a peace officer is. Indiana uses the term officially. Indiana officially uses the term public safety officer because public safety officer was amended in the state of Indiana a number of years ago to include things like paramedics, nurses, medical personnel, EMTs, prosecutors, because of course they had to give themselves some special privileges on that. For the record, I'm not a public safety officer, by the way. If you hit me, it's just a misdemeanor. If you lightly tap a prosecutor on the shoulder, it's a felony. So let's talk about equal application of the law right there.
There we go.
But Indiana expanded the definition to cover basically anyone who works for the state or is executing a function of the state. I don't know that Minnesota has that in their definition of peace officer. And that's going to be a key issue. Because if the Minnesota courts make the determination that Jonathan Ross as an ICE agent does not fit the state definition of peace officer, they could charge him with murder. And if he's not a peace officer, he is subject at that point in time to the normal self-defense standard that the rest of us have. Minnesota actually does, and I looked at this very briefly when I was working my thoughts out on this. Minnesota does have a separate statutory standard with regards to the use of force that law enforcement officers or peace officers are required to use. So if he's qualified as a peace officer, he gets the benefit of that statute. And part of the benefit of that statute is the expectation that there's more training that goes into it, that there's more responsibility that goes along with that. Again, special privileges require special responsibilities. If he's not considered a peace officer, he's back at the general self-defense concept. And if you recall last week when we were talking about the concept that stand your ground just means that there's no legal duty to retreat, as it turns out, Minnesota requires anyone claiming self-defense to make a reasonable effort to escape the danger before claiming self-defense.
Interesting.
Minnesota is not a stand your ground state.
Mm-hmm.
So if Jonathan Ross is subject to a state criminal prosecution because he's not a peace officer by the way their statute has, he is required to establish that it was impossible for him to escape. And that's going to be a problem for him, in my opinion, because the various videos that we have seen, you could make a legal argument that he creates the dangerous situation by placing himself in front of the vehicle, and he clearly gets out of the way, or he has time to get out of the way, because again, you can see all the stuff in real time. You can see how fast she's backing up. You can see how fast she's moving forward. Does the engine rev? Sure. Was that stupid? If it was intentional, probably. But that doesn't mean that she's necessarily trying to run him over. And in fact, despite what the administration currently says with regards to the concept of internal bleeding, he clearly walked away. There were no issues. He was of sound enough mind to call her a fucking bitch after he shot her. Her last words were, "I'm not angry at you, big boy." His first words to her after shooting her are "fucking bitch." You are going to have a very hard time convincing a jury that this is a person who had a reasonable fear for their physical safety, that did not have the ability to retreat, and that this represents a justified shooting. What will happen is if Minnesota does determine that criminal charges are warranted, the federal government will move this out of the state courts of Minnesota into the federal district courts for Minnesota. And they will try to argue that supremacy, that his execution of his federal law enforcement responsibilities were appropriate under color of law, and that the charges should be dismissed because he enjoys that qualified immunity. If the courts disagree with that, the prosecution continues. And there have been a few people who have been mistaken about this. The Department of Justice will not take over that prosecution if it's removed to federal court. The state prosecutors will continue it. The state prosecutors will just be under the federal rules of procedure, and the jury would be drawn from all over the state of Minnesota under state constitutional provisions, state legal provisions. Juries are drawn from the venue where the crime took place, which in this case is Hennepin County, Minnesota. Either side does have, usually defendants will do this, either side does have the ability to request what's referred to as a change of venue if they believe that they're not going to get an impartial jury from the community where the crime is taking place. In removing it to federal court, the federal court jury is drawn from the entire district, so it would be more than just Hennepin County. So that issue at least is taken care of. But the case won't go away. If Minnesota determines that criminal charges are warranted, and if the federal court rejects the administration's argument that he was acting under color of law, the prosecution will continue. And it will not be handled by the Department of Justice. It will be handled by the Minnesota state prosecutors. It'll just take place in federal court and be be handled pursuant to the federal rules of procedure. The one benefit in the grand scheme of things is most states base their procedural rules off of the federal rules of procedure. So it's not like, is there an advantage to the federal government removing it to federal court? Sure, it's a power play. Again, it's an optics. It's a power play. Realistically speaking, it's not going to make any significant difference. And the rules of evidence are interpreted a little bit differently in federal court because you're relying on federal procedure and federal precedent and federal case law.
Right.
But the prosecution would still continue. It's just in a different venue.
Right. And it seems that the Trump administration, I guess no pun intended, but kind of in a way pun intended, is they're looking for home court advantage, to keep that under their relative control. Exactly. While Minnesota's trying to work through their side of things. Jack, this case isn't going away. There's no doubt about that. A lot of the country is keeping their eyes on it very closely, especially given how controversial just the existence of ICE and the way it's operated across the country here, in recent history, coupled with the fact that when we have the windows, plural, into the incident, like we do with all these different videos, it's no wonder that people feel so emotionally and physically tied to this case. It's not going anywhere. We're certainly going to be keeping eyes on it for quite some time now. Jack, I know you played out kind of the different circumstances of what the state's options are and how that might play out. I guess to kind of in closing almost, like, how do you see this ending? And it might be too early to even throw a prediction out there because it's very much rapidly evolving and tensions are high. We're seeing protests across the city regularly. How do you see it ending?
Poorly, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah.
It's bad. I mean, there's no two ways about it. My personal opinion as an attorney is that this was not a justified shooting. My analysis, and that's not to say that if Jonathan Ross called me up and said, hey, I need an attorney, can you defend me on this? It doesn't mean that we're not going to do our job. We're not going to find some argument to make. But the analysis that I can make, again, based off all these publicly available details, I don't think that this is a justified shooting. I think that this is a situation where we put someone with inadequate training, which sounds ridiculous because Jonathan Ross is a military veteran. He's been with ICE for about 10 years. You'd think that there would have been enough training in conflict de-escalation to not have this situation pop up. I think that the tactics that are being used by ICE under the Trump administration have created a lot of these problems. I think that when you are going door to door, demanding to see if there are people in the country illegally, if you are raiding restaurants. There was a story yesterday about how after getting a meal, yesterday time of recording, after getting a meal in Minnesota, ICE agents went back to the kitchen and arrested someone who was not here legally. That does not help the public temperature at all. And because of that, and because the current president, it does not tend to back down. And I don't want to get into a significant argument about if that's good, if that's bad, if that's some sort of personality disorder, if that's what have you. There are already discussions about sending more federal troops into Minnesota. And that backs Minnesota into a wall because they can't back down either. You have a situation where you killed a white woman. I mean, that's literally like if you're gonna kill someone, the worst thing that you do is you kill a white woman. And that's again, that's just the optics. That's just how all of this works at the end of the day. The soccer mom is not the person that you expect to get shot to death by the police. The optics on that are terrible. And as a result, I don't know what's going to happen in the streets. If the National Guard gets called out, who are they going to be? What side are they going to take? Are they going to take the federal government side or the state side? They're a state agency, more or less, but they get their military kit from the federal government. And if the president invokes the Insurrection Act, which is one of these he's talking about, what happens then? The ability to get an off ramp for this is rapidly shrinking, and the most efficient way of getting an off ramp on this, in my opinion, would be to have a truly independent agency conduct the investigation into this. Maybe the Wyoming State Police. No, Wyoming never offends anybody. Let's get the Wyoming State Police in here to investigate this shooting. And then you've got a third party who can say, here is what we have found. Federal prosecutors, state prosecutors, you can make your determination as to what you want to do with this from there.
Like an audit. It's like a third party audit. Yeah.
I mean, that's the only thing that I can think of.
It's a clean strategy.
That's the only thing that I can think of that would calm temperatures on this. Mm-hmm. And even then, that the calming of those temperatures only really happens if there's time.
Sure.
And if you have what is increasingly looking like a paramilitary force arresting people on their jobs, demanding papers from everyone they come into contact with, including United States citizens, demanding that they prove their citizenship, and I have yet to hear a single person tell me how they prove. If they were stopped on the street right now, I have yet to hear a single person explain to me how they would prove that they were a citizen. If you know, leave it in the comments. Seriously, I want to know this. Because I couldn't. I was born here in Indiana. I've lived here my entire life. I've been out of the country a handful of times. My passport's long since been expired, and I don't carry it with me anyway. And Razumich isn't exactly Smith. So the ability to reduce tensions in this is something that I do not think that the body politic has any interest or even any capability of doing right now. Mm-hmm. And that's going to make it worse. And I think that, like I said, I think that our ability to get to an off-ramp is rapidly getting ready to pass us. And if we aren't able to take that off-ramp, if there's not that ability to have what all sides consider to be a fair and clean audit that's not biased, that doesn't look like a cover-up, which is what people think the FBI is doing right now, or doesn't look like a witch hunt, which is what I'm sure some people would say that Minnesota would want to do, no one's going to be happy. And if we just keep putting more paramilitary troops in and having the Vice President of the United States and the White House Deputy Chief of Staff, and for God's sakes, when the hell did that position become like the most powerful thing in Washington? But you have two high-ranking government officials telling these ICE agents that they have immunity, that they can effectively do what they want, and it'll be everyone else who suffers the consequences. It's gonna get worse. And I think that, unfortunately, Renee Good might be the first casualty, and that goes for both sides on it.
Yeah, it's not a happy ending right now, folks. And well, it's not an ending, obviously, but this is something that we are certainly going to be keeping our eyes on because obviously this is a legal podcast. We love to dive into ongoing as well as past case studies and dig into the various mechanisms of criminal law that exist there. With this being such a hot button issue at the moment, we're going to continue to keep our eyes on it when there are new developments. Jack, I know you and I will circle back and provide some updates for everybody, but until then, it's really a matter of just watching, waiting, listening, and hoping that things take a turn in a better direction than they certainly are. Jack, I know we've done a pretty thorough job of summarizing the events and, the different avenues that can play out from here, but any final parting thoughts?
One of the things that you hear every time there's a police action shooting, and of course we've heard it with this one as well, and I want to take an opportunity to address this, is the concept that if they have just complied, this wouldn't have happened. Two things are capable of being true at once. The first is that, yes, following a lawful command from law enforcement will save you a lot of pain in the future. There is not an attorney that I am aware of that has not had at least one case that went from what would have probably been a simple traffic citation or a driving while suspended misdemeanor that became a more serious felony because they thought they could outrun the police. It is a true fact that if you are following a lawful command from a law enforcement officer who is operating under color of law, you will be capable of avoiding being shot. You will be capable of avoiding far more serious charges. And if it is not a lawful stop, your attorney can fix it later. That's one thing that can be true. Another thing that can simultaneously be true is that we have got to start training our law enforcement officers on conflict de-escalation, and we have got to do something with regards to addressing the sense of invulnerability that some of them seem to have because of that qualified immunity issue. It is 100% possible for an officer to, in my opinion, and in the opinion of other legal experts, overreact to the circumstances. And I get it. It's a hard job. It's stressful. But I get death threats. I haven't shot anybody. You know, and that's flippant. You know, I'm not getting death threats every day, and I'm not, getting shot at every day. But neither are police officers. Again, if you're going to have special privileges, you need to be held to a higher standard. And I think that's the second, like I said, that's the second thing that we're not doing. We need to hold officers to a higher standard, and we need to actually carry through with that. So both of those things are simultaneously true. Our standard outro, if you've come into contact with law enforcement for any reason, whether it's resisting law enforcement, whether you ran and got shot, whether you didn't run and you got arrested, whatever it is that came into law enforcement and you need a criminal attorney, our office telephone number is 317-983-5333. We're happy to help you. I would much rather us help you avoid a criminal conviction after the fact than have to read another damn paper about someone getting shot or someone getting seriously hurt. It's not worth it. We can fix this, but we can only fix it if you're alive.
I think that's a good spot to put a period on the end of today's episode. Jack, appreciate you and your time as always. I know you've got a lot of work in the courtroom coming up, so we'll let you get back to that. But I appreciate the time, and we'll see you back here on the next one.
Hopefully the next one will be a fun one. We'll have to cross our fingers.
Yes, indeed, Jack. Well, hey, look, folks, we appreciate you staying with us here today on what is a sensitive conversation, a timely conversation. If you enjoyed today's discussion, I know that's a kind of inflated word, but if you gain something from it, if you learned a thing or two, make sure you hit the subscribe button, on whichever platform you checked us out on, so that you don't miss out on other conversations, not just surrounding this event in particular, but also other great criminal law related discussions. We dive into so many case studies and explore some of the intricacies of criminal law to find unique storylines and definitions. And we've got a lot of great stuff coming for you down the pipeline, and we're excited to be sharing that with you in due time. But we appreciate you guys stopping by and being with us today. So we'll see you next time on Closing Arguments.